Frightful's Mountain, Chapter 5, page 57, Frightful Peregrinates, Part 2. The deluge slowed, the clouds circled counterclockwise, and a flock of spotted sandpipers blew in from the coast. They ran the shore edges like wind-up toys and snatched minute bits of food. Frightful turned her head away. Her natural prey, the water birds, still did not interest her. Sam's training had faded somewhat under Chup's menu, but game from the upland meadows was still very much her idea of food. The sun came out. Frightful flew to the top of the tallest spruce. Although the day was windy, all the guideposts she needed to orient herself were readable. She found the longitude of the Atlantic flyway, the migrating route of the birds of the east, and the magnetic field of the earth. She flew. She was going away from the one mountain among thousands, the one tree among millions, and Sam. She was going south to warm weather and food. Catching an air current that took her up and over a mountain, she looked down on acres of open fields, meadows, and grassy clearings. Here lived the food she liked. She coasted down to the roof of a small cabin. It was Woodchuck Lodge, the mountain home of nature writer John Burroughs. Before Frightful could gather her wits, a chipmunk, abroad on the nice day, snatched some grass seeds and ran under a mammoth boulder and was gone. Around the rock were drifts of snow, now sodden from the tropical storm. A plaque marked John Burroughs' grave. Frightful brought herself to attention. She must eat. Concentrating, she looked at every twisting grass blade and bobbing seed head. Suddenly, she drew in her feathers and stretched her neck. The mountain laurel by the lodge was shaking. Frightful lowered her body to strike. Out from under the porch came Mole. His ears and coat were plastered with autumn burrs and Spanish needles. Around his neck was a collar. Mole had been on an adventure. The adventure had taken him far from the culvert. While Frightful was watching the young Peregrines learn to hunt, Mole's rundown farm had been sold. The new owners were aunt and uncle to Hanny and Hendrik Van Sandford, friends of Sam and Alice Gribley. Hanny and Hendrik had come over to Altamont to help their relatives restore the neglected farm. They had cleared brush, tilled the abandoned fields, and leveled the overgrown fence rows. Their work done, they were driving home in Hendrik's pickup when they saw a dog slinking alongside the side of the road. He wore no collar to say he was a pet. Hendrik stopped the truck, and Hanny jumped out. Mole vanished into a culvert. After many kind words and tasty food offerings, Mole finally trusted Hanny enough to creep into the cab. He cringed at her feet all the way back to the Van Sandford farm. At the farm, Hendrik combed the burrs from Mole's hair and gave him a bath. Mole was embarrassed. He put his tail between his legs and hung his head. Next, Hendrik put a collar around his neck, snapped a leash to it, and dragged him, protesting all the way to the barn. A bed of sweet straw, water, and ample food were put down. Mole dug under the straw and hid. He refused to eat. Hendrik sat with him late into the night, talking softly. Mole heard, "Good dog," many times, and then his new name, General. He listened to the kindness in Hendrik's voice and finally ate and fell asleep as the sun was coming up. 2 nights later, he chewed through his leash and jogged west. He crossed the bridge at Gilboa and climbed into the forested mountains. He hunted, slept, and came out of the trees at Woodchuck Lodge. The layout looked good to Mole. Weeds, briars and the grasses told him there would be rabbits, pheasants, woodchucks, and mice. He sniffed around the lodge, found no sense to say the house was occupied by people, and squeezed under the porch. Near the chimney base, he clawed out a cozy wolf bed and settled in. Although Mole was happy to be away from people and bedded down in his own home, he was faced with a problem. The cold had sent the woodchucks into their burrows for the winter. After a few days of fruitless searching, he trotted past the field, headed for the town dump he had passed on his way up the mountain. Cree, cree, cree! Mole stopped. Sniffing the air, he looked up. Frightful was sitting on top of the lodge, feathers shining in the autumnal light. He stared at her. She cocked her head and stared at Mole. She did not wonder at finding him again, just opened her wings and flew out over the field. Mole broke into a run and, nose to the ground, worked the grasses and dead goldenrod spikes. A rabbit burst up. Swift as light, Frightful was upon it. She pumped her wings and carried it away without coming down to the ground. When she was almost to the lodge, a great horned owl saw Rabbit and Falcon, sped silently out of the woods, and sank her talons into the food. Thrown off balance, Frightful fanned her flight feathers, regained her equilibrium, and went after the owl. Owl and Rabbit vanished into the woods. Frightful, a falcon of the open skies, did not follow. She pushed down on her wings and up with her tail, and came to rest on the porch railing of Woodchuck Lodge. Mole was right behind her. The two looked at each other. Then the old hound turned and went back to his hunting field. On the second try, they caught a pheasant. This time, Frightful scanned the sky for thieves before flying with it to the rooftop. Daintily, she ate choice pieces. Mole sat on his haunches, looking up at her, his tongue hanging out, his mouth drooling. He wanted his share of that food. Suddenly, he barked so viciously that he scared Frightful. She took off, leaving the food behind. The bird rolled down the shingles and fell to the ground. Mole picked it up and, tail wagging, carried it under the lodge. There he feasted. Frightful had eaten enough to bring back her strength. She flew to a tall tree and perched. The bright sun was warming the fields and meadows, creating a twisting and invisible bubble. On it rode a lonely peregrine tiercel. He circled up and up. Frightful opened her wings. Lift took her into the thermal. She spiraled to its ceiling. The tiercel peeled off and shot south like a missile. Frightful was next. She circled the top of the bubble, tipped her wing, and spread her tail. Everything was right. The angle of the sun's rays, the wind, the temperature, and the magnetic field of the earth. She ripped through the sky like a meteor. Her wings spread in glorious flight. She looked down on the vast landscape. And there it was, the one mountain among thousands of mountains, the one tree among millions of trees, and somewhere there, the one boy. Frightful turned abruptly west, and in minutes was over the mountain. Snow lay on its highest levels. Food would be scarce here. She flew back to the Woodchuck Lodge. There the last weak messages from the environment pointed her southward again. But she had seen the mountain. Confused, she cacked in distress and flew into the spruce tree for the night.